All right. Hi there, everybody. Just want to check in. We had a slight tech issue. I just want to make sure that everybody can see me and hear me. I don't. Oh, here we go. Okay. So if you can see me, just there we go. Beautiful. Okay. Good. Well, welcome to this is session 12 of Mahamudra for the People. And I would like to see if we can begin with a little bit of practice. And thank you all for being here. And thank you, Miss Brenda, for being here. All right, so let's start off with a little bit of practice, maybe about 10 minutes or so. Just allow yourself to get into a position that's comfortable. Bring your attention to the present moment. And use whatever you've been using up until this point as an anchor for your Mahamudra practice. And so that could be a visualized object, or that could be an actual object within your field of reference. It could be the mind and phenomenon as it arises in this moment. And allow into that experience, lightly holding the instructions of Philippa's 6 nails, letting go of the past, not preoccupying yourself with the future moment, not really worrying about this moment right now, not analyzing, not making anything happen, and just resting freely in this experience. Do this for about 10 minutes. Okay. Just gently bring yourself back into relationship with the group. Okay. So I hope that everyone's doing okay. One thing that I've definitely noticed over the past 2 weeks of meeting with students is it seems like a lot of people are struggling with these times. And just how full everything feels, whether it be COVID or whether it be, the poor response to George Floyd's death by president and various government, levels of government, citizenry that is taking a conservative stance around power and racism, or just the uncertainty of the times. So many people are, if they're not sick, they find themselves in locations where they still remain more or less on lockdown or some kind of equivalent, and it's the summer, and we're all habituated to wanting to kind of go on vacation or have fun, right? And it seems a little hard to do that. And I was talking with someone recently who was relating to me a feeling of guilt around trying even to make time for themselves, right? And so whether we're feeling guilt or whether we're feeling exhaustion or whether we're feeling depression or whether we're feeling kind of raw and overwhelmed, whether we're feeling concerned, whether we're feeling afraid of becoming sick, whether we're just weary of the intensity of all this time, or weary because we don't really know which way things are going to be going. These are really hard times. And the funny thing about tantric practice is that one kind of notices that sometimes people can have a very manic relationship to expectation around practice, and that practice is transcendent and it blows you out of the water and it removes all problems and it does all this fantastic stuff, and on some level it does do that, but not in that manic way, not in a way that's disassociative, not in a way that where our Dharma practice becomes more like a drug where we engage in it because we need a fix, because we need a distraction, because we can't cope. That's not what practice is really rooted in. And admittedly, all of us at various times can approach it in that way, for that reason. And it's hard and painful sometimes to kind of, come back to the intensity of the moment that we might find ourselves in. And so for this session of Mahamudra for the people, I want to focus a little bit on this idea of our experience being complete as it is, and not something that we don't need to add anything to it. And likewise, we don't need to remove anything from it. We can feel angry, we can feel stressed out, we can feel tense, or we can feel, obviously not one of those things all the time. We probably feel, a combination, just like moment to 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 moment. Maybe quickly or maybe a little bit more slowly. But, we feel. And so I'd like to share an instruction by the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje, with everybody. And I'd like to do it the way I've been doing these over the past couple of weeks, by reading it to you, and then we can kind of unpack it. And if you have questions, we can address those. And if you have questions not on this topic, that's fine too. But why I want to do this is because it is more than evident, and I feel this within myself, just the wariness and the intensity of this moment makes one want to disengage. And it sometimes makes us want to look elsewhere than ourselves for answers. And the truth is that it's likely the case that there are not really any long-term sustainable answers outside of ourselves for the experiences we're going through in this moment. And it could be arguable that there are not answers outside of ourselves for any particular experience we go through, whether COVID had happened or not. And I'd like to just, introduce that and have us work through that a little bit, especially as it relates to Mahamudra. And I want to suggest that part of the beauty of Mahamudra is this process of returning over and over and over again to the fact that there is nothing to add or nothing to remove from this present experience. And it could very well be that for the Western person, right, especially the Americans here, that our habitual relationship to rolling up our sleeves and changing the situation to something that is preferable, that is better, that is more of, whatever it is that we need, actually gets in the way of Dharma practice, especially the practice of Mahamudra. So if you can, like we've done over the past couple of weeks, if it's helpful to do this, to close your eyes while I recite this. It's very short. It's about a page and a half of not too big a book. And this also comes from that book, The Crystal Cave. And the text is known as The Single Word of Heart Advice by Karmapa Rangjung Dorje. Karmapa Rangjung Dorje was the third Karmapa. He is known for many things, one of which was he was a great practitioner of Chö. He was a great Mahamudra master. He was also a contemporary of Longchenpa, the Nyingma Turton, and great, Dzogchen master. He was both a teacher and then probably to some respect also a student of Longchenpa. And he was also, third Karmapa was also a Turton or treasure revealer of a Dzogchen cycle called the Khandro Nyingtik. So again, I'm just going to recite this. Let the sound hit your ear. Let whatever reaction occur when sound hits the ear. And just sit with this. So this is The Single Word of Heart Advice by Karmapa Rangjung Dorje. Homage to all of the sacred masters. The mind of the Buddhas of the three times, that to which all sacred ones aspire, the widely renowned Dharmakaya Mahamudra, is precisely our own mind, which thinks of this and that. All the phenomena of samsara and nirvana are within this awareness. It is the essence of the Pitakas, the sutras, and the tantras. When you put it into practice, there's nothing to be meditated upon whatsoever. Simply, awareness rests vividly awake in its natural state. You don't need to worry or think, is this really Mahamudra? Don't ever hope for improvement or fear degeneration. Don't chase transient concepts. Just rest in this vividly awake awareness. Relax loosely and rest. Besides this, you don't need anything else to meditate on. By practicing in this way again and again, at some point, you will recognize the essence of thoughts. When that happens, realization is baseless and rootless. Spontaneous liberation of all attachment and the instantaneous relinquishment of all habitual patterns follows. This is called Buddhahood. This is what is meant when we say, one moment makes the difference. In one moment, complete enlightenment. I swear there is not a more profound final instruction from the sacred and accomplished masters other than this single word of heart advice. Please don't show this to unworthy people. If the seal of secrecy dissipates, it is impossible for you to receive the blessings. Remember me always. There is no mistake in this. Simply rely on the blessings. It is my command that this text should not be taught to anyone who has not received the full instructions. This was written by Rongjung Dorje at Yangon Hermitage. Sarva Mangalam. So the mind of all Buddhas of the three times, that to which the sacred ones aspire, the widely renowned Dharmakaya Mahamudra, is precisely your own mind, which thinks of this and that. We spend so much time running away, and we spend so much time looking for distractions. We spend so much time fighting to change the world. We spend so much time trying to change the course of reality. We spend so much time thinking that our practice is weak or ineffective. We spend so much time feeling pain and depression, feeling fried, feeling stressed out. We spend so much time trying to cultivate positive outlook and work towards having a positive effect on those around us, and then we get anxious or irritated, and then we hurt others because we lack wisdom and skill. In the United States, at least, the word faith is so complicated. In fact, it makes me think of the George Michael song. And like, what a crazy time. It seems like a long time ago. We have to have faith. We have to have faith in our practice. And sometimes we need to let go of how complex we are. And let our intellect, our training, all this stuff just go. I like to talk to people about practice as being the only thing that will get us through this time. And I don't necessarily literally mean that, but sometimes I do. The only way to survive emotionally and spiritually in times like this is not to try and overpower or outshine the problems that we're facing, but to sit with them. And to know that within this experience of how messed up things can be, how messed up we feel, how frustrated we are, how hopeless or pointless or joyless or stuck this moment makes us feel, that this experience is part of the practice of the Dharmakaya Mahamudra. All phenomena of samsara and nirvana are within this awareness. We talk such good talk about decolonizing this and that. And yet our mind still has preference. We still prefer things, some things over other things. That seals our suffering, seals the deal. All phenomena of samsara and nirvana are within this awareness, that ability to know, the natural arising experience of vipassana. When you put it into practice, this awareness, right, our practice of Mahamudra, it is the essence of the Pitakas, of the sutras and the tantras. We do not need to look anywhere else. We do not need to go to India to collect books. We do not need to create an environment that is different than this. We do not need to be anybody else, anyone other than who we are. Simply, or rather, when you put this into practice, there's nothing to be meditated on whatsoever. Now, as long as we have preference, we're not able to rest naturally. Then we're practicing something. We're not practicing Mahamudra. We're practicing, disassociation. We're practicing, anything but here. We're practicing the practice of not in my backyard. We're practicing the practice of hiding from ourselves, hiding from our pain, hiding from how our pain makes us feel and react. When we prefer this Om Shanti, 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 everything's all great and lovely and, sunny and, soft muted colors and nice sunlight coming through the windows and, weird like Sangha where everybody's always smiling all the time. We're practicing an illusion. So Brenda writes, "This is truly living life as it is. How powerful. However, I'm having some difficulty with today's issues. What do you suggest? My difficulty comes from seeing others suffering." Yeah. Seeing others suffer often causes us suffering as well. I'll try and find it. I don't think I'll be able to find it now. And Lord knows I have no idea how to share a screen here, and I'm not going to try. There's a little button, but I'm not going to mess with it. I'll find this image and I'll see if maybe our social media people can put it up. But there's this amazing painting of the it's a tanka of the Buddha just before achieving enlightenment or having the realization of enlightenment. And he's sitting there and there are all of these ghosts and demons and seductresses and every kind of emotion is depicted anthropomorphically kind of coming at him, right? And he's not having an external experience necessarily. Like he wasn't witnessing as best we know, at least according to the story, physically witnessing the suffering of others, right? But it was all of his, everything that's triggered, right? Everything that arises and is triggered, all of kleshas, attachment, aversion, ignorance, everything that's born out of that. That experience was very internal and yet also very visceral. And I think the thing that sometimes, again, I think this is a real American problem in relationship to Dharma practice, is that we see beings suffer and we then want to change everything that causes the suffering. And there's nobility in that. And there's obviously skill in that. And there's also a tremendous amount of power that we can have to do that. And yet, practice is also about learning how to develop a relationship to that suffering. When I say that, I mean really, I mean it in maybe the sense, like in an alchemical sense, of transforming dross material to gold, right? Or in philosophical alchemy, the transmutation of that which is lesser into, the philosopher's stone, which kind of represents a form of illumination. And the truth is, if we transform the whole world around us, removing the suffering of all beings, seen and unseen, that's almost like a Marxist approach to samsara, right? It's great. It does certain things, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't address that root cause of our experience of suffering. Right? It does not address our fear, our anxiety. It doesn't address the power that anger has when it arises. It doesn't address the ways in which we can be violent towards one another as we try and seek to create change. It doesn't address our relationship to binary thinking, which causes suffering. If we could change the whole world into gold, there would still be suffering. If we could legislate a perfect system, we would still find a way to suffer. And it's not because we're bad, it's not because we're wrong, it's because we haven't done the work with respect to mind in direct relationship to the way that we react and relate to everything that arises. We want to recreate the Garden of Eden, but we can't do it with our hands. And here's the paradox. I think the paradox is that, we do have the capability of reducing the suffering of others through direct action, through affecting change. And yet there are serious limitations to that as well. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't do that, because there are obvious benefits. But when we talk about reducing the capital S suffering for others, then we can only do that through subjugating this. And this seems to me to be the unique American stain in the practice of Mahamudra, is that, roll up our sleeves and let's do it. But I don't think that's not what it's about. So then the question becomes, fine, if that's the case, and I'm not saying I'm right at all, when we see suffering, what is the process that arises? If we have difficulty seeing others suffering, that's a much different thing. I had this opportunity. It was about a year ago, um, like at work, where the executive staff, well, there's this person who's in charge of uh, kind of strategic thinking and our mission, in uh, our jails. And they came up with this idea that all of the senior leadership should spend a day touring just one jail, and you just get to know it really well, from the intake to to housing areas in between, the kitchens. You see the whole process. You meet with both people in custody, and you meet with staff. You take 8 hours, and you learn as much as you can. Interact with everybody. Ask them about what's going well, what's going badly, what's a problem, what's not a problem. And there's this lovely deputy warden who was showing me around. She's really sweet, really kind, really generous to everybody. And we turn the corner, and I see a group of 10 or 12 young black men being brought to, I don't know, it was either to the yard or to, uh, for a program of some kind. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, like this is just so messed up, right? The situation is just like, it made me like physically ill, but here are these young men, early 20s probably, lined up in, their jail clothes. And what an image that has gone through time in the American experience, and to some extent hasn't really changed much in some environments, right? And part of me was just like, what the hell? Like, I can't. Witnessing this is just like, it is hurting me. Everything that is implied by this particular scene makes me hurt. And in that particular situation, there's definitely a social ill that needs to be worked on. And then at the same time, there is something in witnessing the pain that arises in me in my relationship to the system I work in, this criminal justice system that exists, and holding that and letting that arise in a way that is healthy is where wisdom is. Yes, I get to be the one to leave that facility after 8 hours, but I'm also the one who ends up having a scar from witnessing the facility. And that suffering actually can serve a purpose. The respective like co-emergent suffering of person who acts as witness as well as the person going through the suffering, that is not in vain. It's complex. I can't, let's say I had a bomb. I couldn't blow up that building and solve the problem. Let's say I had a magical key and just let everyone out. That wouldn't solve the problem. The problem is our ideas about justice, our ideas about race, our ideas about forgiveness, our ideas that, at least in the United States, push us away from restorative justice, our ideas about how societies function. But all of those things come back down on an individual level to preference, to preferring one thing over another, preferring one outcome for others than another outcome. And if we were able to collectively develop an experience of mind for which there is neither preference for any particular outcome, and a deep appreciation and love for the wisdom inherent in every moment, I suspect we would be able to reduce the suffering for many, 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 many people in many different arenas. But if every time we experience that suffering, we turn away from our practice, not much gets done. And it's true, Tony, that we're ants in a colony, perhaps. But is that true? I mean, I have to just challenge that idea. It feels like we're ants in a colony when it comes to creating physical change. But that's not necessarily the case either. As we organize, we have more power, more agency, more ability to affect change. You know, we have to understand how change can be made. But within the context of our Dharma practice, right, within the context of Mahamudra, every single being is not only a sibling of, but also the offspring of the Buddha. That is the kind of the DNA that courses through our spiritual veins. So I just want to get to Anjana's question. She writes that I'm finding that my practice is deepening and intensifying, and I feel a genuine need of it growing in me. I'm also noticing that my practice feels very one foot in front of the other and is mostly addressing personal neuroses, fears, and just my shit. How do we discern between the necessary work of our shit and self-indulgence and self-absorption? Thank you. So I think the big kind of difference between being able to walk, one foot in front of the other, moment by moment by moment, aware of everything that's arising within our experience, and a kind of narcissism is the way the lens is adjusted. So I'm just going to insert this second paragraph from this instruction. You don't need to worry or think, is this really Mahamudra? Don't ever hope for improvement or fear degeneration. Don't chase transient concepts. Just rest in this vividly awake awareness. Relax loosely and rest. Besides this, you don't need anything to meditate on. I was having lunch with my wife a little bit before the session, and we were just talking about like how crappy everything is in the world, And somehow in the course of the conversation, we came to this curiosity around the fact that because there's really nowhere we can go, right? Like more than half of the U.S. is on New York State's list of states where if you go, you need to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And really, we don't have desires to go to the restaurants that are, not even really, they're only open outside. Most shops are still closed. A lot of shops haven't survived. Right, that there is this great reduction. I mean, it's terrible. Obviously, it affects people's livelihoods, etc. But one of the effects it has is it kind of like reduces a lot of our outward activities, which means there's a lot more inward activity, which on one level is a real blessing, because that allows us to not spend as much time and energy and effort distracting ourselves, getting caught up in all of this external phenomenon. And it means like, holy shit, now I need to see my face. Now I need to understand my process. Now I need to perhaps account for my behavior more than I had before. And so this isn't narcissistic unless we craft either a narrative or a need for this process to allow us to have a need to be. So if I wake up raw and agitated and stressed out because there's so many people in the house, right? There's no privacy and all this stuff, right? Normal things to feel. And I decide to say, I wonder how long this feeling is going to last today. And just spend time remaining aware of it. Or remaining aware / developing curiosity around what is the root of this. That is a powerful place to practice, and it's not a narcissism. It's not a kind of fear. It's not we shouldn't fear that we're kind of navel gazing. Don't ever hope for improvement or fear degeneration. The next line I also love too, because it's, in America we obsess over and prefer those who are experts, right? Everybody's got, their advanced degree, which makes them an expert in things. And here we are, Rangjung Dorje, arguably one of the greatest experts in meditation, especially Mahamudra and Dzogchen, and the union between the two, saying, by practicing in this way again and again, at some point, you'll recognize the essence of thoughts. At some point. It's not precise. By coming back to resting in awareness, by coming back to examining where our preferences lay, why our preferences arise, from where does preference arise? What is preference? Is preference necessary? Right? All of these beautiful rhetorical questions that will one day unlock the essence of thought. There's no defined answer necessarily around some of these things, because we need to go through our own unique process and neuroses and attachments and aversions as we go through this practice. As practice is organic, that's not something that we can just push through. You can't look through books like this and be like, "Oh, you got it, man. I don't need to. I don't need anything." In fact, there's this thing that happened with me. My root teacher, Tsuma Dechen Sangmo. Like I went to India, I met her, practiced with her, studied with her. The first time I met her, it was like mind blowing. She had introduced actually this book to me then, and Mahamudra, and Chu, and a bunch of stuff. And then I was fairly young. I was still in college, and so when I went back to school later the next year, she apparently wrote this letter, which she claimed it just had all the answers in it that I needed. And she wrote it to myself and a friend. And it got lost in the mail. And we never found it. And before she died, we were sitting together, and somehow that letter came up, and she just started laughing, and she was like, I tried to offer you the really short way, but that's not your karma, clearly. Now you need to go through it the long way. and that's part of this, is we have to, like, if each one of us was like a knot, our knot would all be, maybe kind of similar, but essentially very unique to each one of us. And we need to go through the process of diving into our practice, especially in times like this. And I've met with people who, and even earlier this week, who would relate to me that I can't do it. I just can't. It's too intense, and I understand. Believe me. There are periods of time where I find myself very frustrated with myself. I find myself frustrated with what's arising. I find myself frustrated with my own lack of resilience. And this is really one of the reasons why we need ethics as a counterweight to practice, because it's the ethics that pulls us back in to kind of go again. Let's go around one more time. Because I take this vow to benefit beings. I'm taking this vow to try and get a little more free so I can help others get free. And so there's this paragraph after that. By practicing in this way again and again, at some point you will recognize the essence of thoughts. When that happens, realization is baseless and rootless. Spontaneous liberation of all attachment and the instantaneous relinquishment of all habitual patterns follows. This is called Buddhahood. This is what is meant when we say one moment makes the difference. In one moment, complete enlightenment. And that quote, it's actually in quotation marks, and it's from the Manjushri Namasamgiti. One moment makes the difference. In one moment, complete enlightenment. What would happen if you didn't show up? That moment wouldn't be able to happen. What would happen if our suffering was so strong that we couldn't show up? And we weren't able to experience the relinquishment of all habitual patterns because we were stuck in one. This, I really don't know anything about Shambhala Buddhism, but I'll use the metaphor of the sacred warrior. If this is not being a sacred warrior, warring with our own need to disengage, warring with our fear and the pain that we experience when we see other people suffering, and that causing us to just freeze up. One moment makes a difference. In one moment, complete enlightenment. This is why we're not ants in a colony, because one moment makes a difference. So Kyle writes, I'm grateful to be here. I recently noticed that my view of the Bodhisattva view has been from a place of I must suffer for others, or I must suffer to be good enough to benefit others. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Those two statements, I must suffer for others, or I must suffer to be good enough to benefit others, reminds me of like this. And I mean this with kindness. I'm just going to speak freely. That we don't even know what suffering is. We are stuck here, all of us, suffering together. We suffer when we feel anxiety, suffer when we feel rage. Our attachment and our aversions cause us suffering. Our misapprehension, like they say, mistaking a rope, the trunk of an elephant for a rope, and the leg of an elephant for a tree. Our ignorance prevents us from seeing clearly and causes us to suffer. Even the most beautiful things and relationships and family experience and all this stuff that we cultivate, pour time into, really focus on, is impermanent and won't last. For that reason, we suffer. The career is that we carefully create and nurture, spend time as if we're pruning a tree in a garden. It won't last. And because of that, we suffer. This body of ours, which we prefer over the body of others, will at one point become sick and wither, and we will die. And because of that, we will suffer. The reality of the situation is, whether we're aware of it or not, we are suffering almost all the time. And so the Bodhisattva doesn't suffer for others. And doesn't have to suffer to be good enough to benefit others. The Bodhisattva is informed by the very painful and lonely recognition of the way that they suffer, as well as the potential suffering that they cause due to their reactivity, so their attachment, their aversion, due to their ignorance, not being able to see things clearly. And from that place makes the vow to cut that suffering at the root. And we cut that suffering at the root through practices like Mahamudra. We cut suffering at the root by removing our obsession with the past. Oh, I went to India blah, blah, blah times. I met so-and-so. They blessed me on the head. They gave me the reading transmission for whatever. I've been empowered for blah, 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 blah. None of that stuff matters. I have preference for the future. I'm training for this role. In the future, I'll arise as blah, blah, blah. That's not happened yet. Our suffering in relationship to the present not right now, not these times. It can't happen here. It'll be better in the future. It was better in the past. When we practice free of analysis or the need to make things different. Oh, well, if we only did this, there would be no suffering. Oh, I've got to look around for the answer. Where is the answer? If we are lost in the forest of suffering, whether we like it or not. If we thought that through our analysis of the forest of suffering, we would find a way out, we would really just be running around in circles. So the Bodhisattva is the person, the being, the entity who resolves to cut the root of suffering. And we cut the root of our experience of suffering and simultaneously our role within propagating suffering by generating the experience of free and open, direct relationship to mind, free of preference, free of habit. Like those phrases like, well, that's just the way we do things. institutionalized patriarchy, institutionalized racism. That's just, well, that's the way we do things. Why change it? It works for us. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's broken. I'm broken. You're broken. We're continually broken by our suffering. So the Bodhisattva is somebody who is going against the grain. For some, as it was for my root teacher, for them, somebody who had suffered physical, mental, and emotional abuse at the hands of abusive men who, in the context of the way race arises in India, had a daughter out of wedlock with a much darker Indian man, suffered more than she had to. Her family abandoned her for a long time. She contracted illness as a result because she didn't have the means she needed to take care of herself. For her bodhisattva vow was, I've suffered, and I will not let anyone else suffer the way I have. And it doesn't really matter, I think, where who we are and how we arise. When we take time to open our hearts, we're all suffering in such profound ways. In the United States, the one thing that our culture excels at is preventing people from being who they truly are. That is true. You could be a white man and still feel like you are not able to be who you truly are. And I'm not saying that's the same as the experience of a person of color, but suffering is something that binds us all together. And when we aspire to take the Bodhisattva vow and begin to kind of walk on that path, we're vowing to empty that pit, the pit of suffering. We're vowing to cut the root that causes suffering. This mental, discursive, habitual mind of discriminatory preference, one thing over another. Whether it's, like low grade, like obsession with Om Shanti, and it can go the other way, like, low grade obsession with over Shakti. The point is being able to find our balance. And so anyway, bringing this back to the beginning, because we're getting kind of close to the end of this talk. As right now, whatever we're feeling is authentic. It's the ground of the experience of this particular moment. And it's not a really pleasant place to be right now. And if we can remember one thing, It's remembering this idea that the mind of all the Buddhas of the three times, right, the essence of Buddha nature, that to which all sacred ones aspire, the widely renowned Dharmakaya Mahamudra, is precisely our own mind, which thinks this and that. When we're angry or we're pissed off, when we're depressed and don't know what to do, can't get out of bed, when we feel lost, when we feel tired of just the need to kind of get out and run away somewhere, or the need to just curl up, get in the bathtub. We need to remember that our mind is exactly the same as the mind of all of the Buddhas of the three times. And that all of phenomena, all of samsara, as well as nirvana, arise within each moment of experience of our awareness. We're all blessed with this. So anyway, there are two questions I want to get to. So Lorena writes, I'm a social worker who is outraged by social and racial injustice. I feel like I've always struggled to understand if I can balance my inner spiritual work with my outer justice work. Is it foolish of me to try and make change in samsara? No, I don't think so. Keep doing it. Perhaps the answer is just to walk with patience, one foot in front of the other, and see what arises and feels right for me to do. Any thoughts are welcome. I'm going to just read through these. Jarrett writes, recently I found myself in a strong state of equanimity and feel great bliss that stuck around for a couple of weeks. Since feeling more normal, i.e. reactive and neurotic, I find myself using that state of equanimity as a subtle target. I don't think I'm trying to relive something that is dead, but maybe I am, I don't know. I guess my question is about using these experiences as guides. These are just I was just going to say that. These are just signposts on the path. And yet from a Mahamudra perspective, there is no path. Is this just clinging? So they're signposts or like a map. So if I'm going to drive to lovely Miss Brenda Collins down in Atlanta, right? I don't know the way, I know I could take 95 kind of far. I don't know how that would get me directly to Atlanta. So I needed signposts, right? The signposts themselves, though, are not something to obsess over, right? So if I see the sign, Atlanta, I'm driving down there and it's like Atlanta, 200 miles from here. I'm like, if I was just like, holy shit, that sign says Atlanta, like I'm going to fucking hold on to this thing, right? I would never get to my destination. So allowing ourselves to have experiences, recognize, this is the beautiful thing about the awareness aspect of this. Recognize the experience, right? Not hold on to it, not obsess, and just keep going. So I think using these as signposts, using them as markers on the path is really, you answered your own question, I think, is while technically there is no path, when we have these, because these kinds of small awakenings or awakening experiences, make note of them because they help us. It's kind of like the glasses come off and you're like, well, if my glasses come off, I can't see. It's like putting the glasses on for a little bit. And it's like, oh my God, I see everything clearly. Right? I'm oriented. And then over time, the glasses come off, right? But I remember the clarity, I remember the vividness, right? So if that begins to arise again in either that way or a different way, then we know that, rest in this. Hopefully that's helpful. So Lorena, I just want to get back to your question. So in my experience, the one that I shared, that day, spending all that time in one of the jails, what I do is I say, okay, like in that particular moment, I obviously can't. I would get fired if I tried to disrupt what was going on in that jail at that time. Right? And there's not a lot of skill in that. But I have a lot of impact in different aspects of what happens in our facilities. And so from that moment, I can, and I did, and I do resolve to make the place better. I resolve to connect people with services. I resolve to change culture. I resolve to move the needle. And I resolve, in my particular case, in order to do that is to play, a political game, to be able to remain in the arenas, to have a say, to move that needle, right? So just because our practice is asking us to question our relationship to dualistic thinking and preference and all of that does not mean that that's just where we need to cut our activity. Our activity can be, physically going out and protesting. Our activity could be working directly. So, in social work, providing direct service, right? It could be starting an organization. It could be, many folds, right? Get out the vote. So there's so many things, right? Because again, providing relief for people, reducing people's suffering through connecting them to services, through creating more equitable and just systems is important, absolutely. So there's no need to feel like you don't have to do that or shouldn't do that. But to give up practice for that is also, on the whole scale of things, it's not such a bad thing, but we're not working, we're not doing the inner work which we need to access greater wisdom. Yeah, secret agent yogi. That's basically, if we could all be secret agent yoginis and yogis, that would be a beautiful thing, because then we have that balance of lived experience through suffering. Because this is the thing is, again, a bodhisattva who has never suffered is not one that I'm going to be taking refuge in, because they don't know. It could be cool to be like, I don't know, like some kind of blue blood bodhisattva, but I do not prefer that. We have to know suffering. We have to experience it. And then we also have to have some kind of qualitative experience in working through our suffering. And that will allow us to be able to demonstrate activity that is compassionate and wise. So just as much as we talk about things like trauma-informed, all sorts of things, right? We're looking at samsara-informed or liberation-informed. I think liberation-informed is better, because liberation implies that we've gone through the process of awakening from the process of our suffering. That allows us to have liberation-informed activity. And then Tony writes, the response of equanimity to others' suffering feels instinctually similar, like the kind of turning away that I've been trained to do since childhood as a white assigned male at birth agent of capitalism. I understand in theory that if you could respond with equanimity, it would only make me a better agent of response to others' suffering, but it feels like numbing. Yes, and this I think connects directly to the point I made before, is that the response of equanimity to other people's suffering. So again, working through our own reaction to other people's suffering is not responding with equanimity. It's sitting in the shitty fire and then arising in that and practicing in that. We need to be awake to all of the ways which the experience that we're living right now is impossible. But the experience that we're living right now leaves us blistered. We may fail to see that, but we are all blistered and bruised up and scarred. And even in your like white maleness, you are blistered and bruised and cut up. Nobody gets through this, in a shiny way. Mahamudra in hell. It should be like Bhumi Sparsha, nobody gets through this without getting beat up. But seriously, I think that we need to be real with ourselves. We are all suffering. And white men who have specific qualities assigned to them at birth and throughout their lives are also suffering. I know I'm suffering. I know sometimes it feels unbearable. So part of our practice is coming back to that. And from that place, though, coming back to understanding the spaciousness within this experience of suffering. And that is really the kind of, little mini nuclear reactor in the heart of the Bodhisattva. So, with that said, I really want to thank everybody for being here today and for this conversation. Right now, I wanted to dedicate the merit to the little mini nuclear reactors in the hearts of all bodhisattvas. May the practice of Mahamudra fill those reactors with the fuel rods of Dharmakaya. May each one of you blow up into a mushroom cloud of non-dual, spacious compassion. May you completely irradiate and melt and contaminate the suffering of others, leaving a trail of unending and forever lasting liberation. Thank you all. Be well and have a good weekend.